Hey, welcome back to Begley's Mailbag, where we answer your questions on the Knicks and the NBA. We've got a special NBA trade deadline edition. Trade deadline coming up on February 10th. Our buddy Cuse Knicks fan checks in and asks, what type of package would the Knicks look for in a potential Randle trade? Now, let's be clear here. I don't think the Knicks are out there calling teams trying to get off of Julius Randle. I think that, teams have called and probably will call between now and February 10th. And we reported last week that one team recently came away with the impression that Randle was available for the right price. When you talk about what package the Knicks would look for, I have to think that you're looking for, a number one, number two, number three player in return for a Randle trade, because you're giving up a player that you stamped as the face of your franchise, but also a significant part of your team going forward when you extended him this offseason. So you're not looking to throw Julius Randle away to salary dump him. I don't think that would be possible anyway, even if you were. But I think you're trying to get back significant talent, and you're not trying to just make a sideways trade here. So I don't think in any way, shape, or form the Knicks would look to dump Randle or move off of his salary at the trade deadline. Kivy015 asks about Tom Thibodeau and whether he's on the hot seat or not. I don't think that his seat is hot. I don't think that's the case right now. Thibodeau, Coach of the Year last year. Obviously, the Knicks have struggled for much of this season, his second year in New York. But you look at the big picture, I can't see the Knicks letting this head coach go during this season. Now listen, if things continue to go sideways after the deadline and it just doesn't work out this year for the Knicks, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Thibodeau and on the front office to deliver a winner in year three, because it's hard to take a step back anywhere in the NBA, but I think particularly in this market. So year three will be, everybody will be under the microscope if the Knicks miss the playoffs this season. And then, a slow start, I think, all bets are off at that point in year three. But right now, no, I don't think his seat is hot. I think he will be the coach for the rest of this season. And then you see how things are going into next offseason. We've got one from Mark3V who asks, is Alec Burks the likeliest to be moved to make room for Cam Reddish at the deadline? Now, a couple things here with Alec Burks. We know how much Tom Thibodeau values Burks. He uses him all over the floor. He used him as a starter for a while this season. He's been back coming off the bench more recently. My personal opinion, I think Burks is better served off the bench, making that second unit more potent. But in general, I think Thibodeau knows that he needs Burks to try to win games and try to compete night in and night out. So I think on paper it makes sense to move Burks because of the length of his contract. And then you look at the Joe Ingles situation in Utah, maybe there's something to be done there. But I have a hard time thinking that Tom Thibodeau would sign off on just kind of letting Burks go for not much of a return because of the way he values him. Good question from Boeing's Bias, who asks, what are the odds that we see the majority of our veterans traded away by the deadline? I don't see the odds as high, because if you're talking about majority of the veterans, then you're talking about pretty much a sell-off of this roster, because there are so many veterans on the roster, in the rotation. I don't think the Knicks are going to be in full-blown sellers mode at the trade deadline, regardless of what happens from a win-loss standpoint between now and February 10th. Every indication that we've gotten since Leon Rose took over, and particularly after last season, is the Knicks are going to try to win games, prioritize winning games, try to make a run to the play-in tournament, to a playoff spot after the deadline. So I'd be surprised if they sold off a significant number of veterans by the deadline in order to make room for the young guys. If you're talking about a big trade where you're trading for a top player with a big salary like De'Aaron Fox, then a couple veterans would have to be in the trade to salary match, but I don't think they're going to kind of go on a fire sale here and get rid of a bunch of vets just to make room for the young guys on the roster. And a query from All3TOTV, who asks, what small point guard trades can we make? If you're looking for a starting point guard, I think you have to be comfortable with sacrificing some of your future in that trade, whether it's future picks or a young player on your roster. I don't think you're going to get a starting quality point guard without sacrificing some of your future. An interesting name to me Goran Dragic, a veteran. He doesn't solve the starting point guard issue for the Knicks, but they're looking for some depth. Let's say if they move Kemba Walker, I wonder if Dragic is a possibility there. There's so much speculation since the offseason that he ends up in Dallas, but that's a name to keep an eye on for me. But I don't think you're getting, somebody who's going to solve all your point guard issues via trade without sending out significant assets if you're the Knicks. Got a funny one from Teddy Island, who wonders, what number will Donovan Mitchell wear with the Knicks? Mitchell, 45 with the Jazz. Jericho Sims currently wearing 45. I'm sure they could work something out if things were to come to fruition there for Knicks fans and their hopes and dreams of landing Donovan Mitchell. But, the interesting thing here is I know that there was a report last week, I think it was, quoting an Eastern Conference scout saying that Donovan Mitchell was a first-round exit away from coming to the Knicks. No disrespect to Rick Bucher, one of the top NBA reporters for a long time, but if that person could guess what Donovan Mitchell's move is going to be if the Jazz lose in the first round, that person wouldn't be a scout. He would be president of basketball operations somewhere, because that's a tough assessment to make at this point in the season. Now, there was so much noise around Donovan Mitchell before he signed that extension with the Jazz. We reported that some of his teammates weren't sure about his long-term future in Utah leading up to that decision to sign the extension. Obviously, he's extended. He's there now. The ties to the Knicks are always going to be there. Leon Rose, obviously Donovan Mitchell from the area, obvious ties with the Mets, but there are many hurdles to cross before we start talking about Donovan Mitchell's number with the Knicks. Teddy brings up an interesting point, though, because the Knicks have these assets, right? The future first-round picks, the second-round picks, and the young players on the roster where they feel that they can be aggressive in trading for a superstar, trying to trade for a superstar. So does that mean that you are less aggressive at the deadline and for a trade that may upgrade your roster but doesn't, change your franchise in terms of bringing an all-star here, because you want to hold on to your assets in case a Donovan Mitchell becomes available? It's an interesting dynamic to consider for the Knicks as they approach the trade deadline, because maybe they hold their fire hoping that something else is coming down the line, but that's a big hope and a big if. So interesting calculations for the front office to make ahead of February 10th. That's it for this edition of Begley's Mailbag. Thanks for the questions, everyone. Please keep them coming, because we'll be back with another show later this month.